Hi there. This video is going to be formatted in a little bit different way than usual. And the reason why the format is going to be different is because I want to show you guys the process that I go through to solve a problem. And maybe if you guys see this process, it might help you to improve your current process or start implementing the process that I go through. So the order that the video is going to go in, first I'll state the problem, then I'll do some research. After that, we're going to look how to get solutions and then how to choose a solution from the solutions that you found for your project. And the last step is implementing that solution in the project. If you guys enjoy the videos that I make and you find them useful, consider subscribing to my channel. And if you want to support my channel, you can support me at Patreon. There's a link in the description. So let's get started with the process. First step is stating the problem. And in the previous video, I said that I wanted to add the ability of picking up different types of items. So I went ahead and created a different item. I'll show the step-by-step how to create it in the implementation part of this video. But now let's take a quick look at the problem that I'm trying to solve in this video. If we pick up the carrots, it's still showing up the carrots, but whenever we pick up the turnip, it still shows that we picked up a carrot. And this is the problem that we're trying to solve in this video. So for me to be able to correctly display that item in the inventory, we need to pass some kind of data from our pickup item to our inventory so that it will display the correct item there. And for that, we need to store some data with our prefabs that can be accessed during the runtime. The only thing right now that we need to pass into the inventory is just a sprite. But before we decide to implement that, we need to do some research to have a better understanding what other information we might be storing. And that might change how we implement this data storage. And research for this kind of thing can look like just turning a game on that you know that has that feature in and check out what type of inventory it has and what information is stored. So for instance, right here, I pulled up RuneScape, and here's some different items in RuneScape. You have logs, and when you put your cursor over it, you can see that you can click and craft something out of it. Then you have fish, which is food, and you can eat it to gain some health. And then there's some cake also that you can eat. Then you have arrows, which are stackable items, and you can equip those to your character. And then we have swords that you can also equip to your character to give him some attack stats or something like that. So for research, look at some examples that you actually like how they work, and something that is using close to what you're trying to implement will give you some ideas of what type of information that you need to store about those items. So from just this example, you can see that there's different types, and when you click on the item, there's also a different function that runs. So you could go and look at some more examples of the inventory usage and maybe get some more input from there, but we'll continue on with our process. So after the research, we know that there is more than one piece of information that we need to store about the item. And later on, we might even have to change the behavior of an item based on the type it is. So now we're trying to get a solution. So how do I go about getting a solution for a problem? So first, after I did the research, I always try to solve the solution on my own. Try to think of ways that I can solve it with the knowledge that I already have. And that way I improve in solving problems on my own based on the knowledge that I have already. And after I try to create a solution and maybe write it down on a paper, run through it in your head, how you would implement it and how it would be used, I go online and try to find solutions that might exist for this problem. So in this case, I can go to YouTube and try to find Unity inventory system. And right there at the top, we have a solution from Brackeys. And also right here, there's a solution from CodeMonkey. So you can check those out. If you look for some solutions, you will find that the solutions are different for the same problem. So Brackeys in his tutorial is using scriptable objects to store the data about different items, while CodeMonkey is hard coding the data inside of a C# script. So you'll be able to find different solutions. And at this point, by looking at these solutions that exist, you can either rethink your whole solution, or you might find things that might improve your initial solutions. So in our case, we have multiple solutions to choose from, and the solution that we'll choose right now is not the final solution that you would use in your project. So because of that, you have to be real smart about implementing the solution. So you need to make it in a way that later on you'll be able to change how it works without redoing a lot of node connections. And we'll actually take a look how we can do that with our problem here. Now, what solutions do we have that we can use for Bolt? So you can go the scriptable object approach and actually create scriptable objects and then import those scriptable objects to Bolt. But to create scriptable objects, you will need to create a C# class. And like I said, the solution that I choose right now is not necessarily the final solution that we're going to use. So maybe we'll end up moving to scriptable objects later, but not in this video. The other solutions that we have is either taking CodesMonkey's approach and hard-coding our values, except since we're using Bolt, we would hard-code it a little bit different than with script. And how that would look is inside our item slot flow graph, you can add a switch and you can switch on a string. And we can pass the item's name into a string. And in the graph inspector, we can add options. So we can add caret option, and then we can add turnUp. And based on the input of the object, we can decide which sprite we want to display. And the third option would be taking a similar approach to scriptable objects, but instead of creating scriptable objects, go to our crops prefab and store the values inside the variables. And this is the option that we're going to use in this video. So we can add our first variable, sprite, click add, then we can choose the type, look for sprite, select that, and the value that we want for caret is our crop caret. So let's select that. So there we stored some data in our caret. Now we need to save the same data in our other crop. But before I add the variable to the other crop, let me walk through the steps that I took to create this new crop. In the last video, I left off at this point right here, where I have a field of carrots and I can collect all the carrots from the field and they populate the inventory. And the next thing that I wanted to do is add different objects that I can pick up. So it shouldn't be that hard to create a variation of our caret. First, let's go to our caret prefab. And then if I want to create duplicates of the caret prefab, it would be wise to switch from embedded source to a macro source. So you can click convert and that will prompt you a window to name the file of the macro. And I'll name the file pickup. Click save. Now we're using that macro instead of the embedded. And that will make it easier for us to modify the pickup logic when we're using it in multiple items. So let's go to caret, duplicate it by clicking Ctrl D. We'll change this caret to be crop turnip, and we'll change the mesh to turnip and the elements to wood birch. There we go. Now we have two types of crops. So we can place it in our scene, and let's remove those two carets and make some room for it. Place it right here. So if you duplicated the caret prefab after you added the sprite variable in, the variable will also be in the crop turnip, and you can modify the sprite that is selected there and you'll be good. But since I duplicated the caret before I added the variable, I have to add the variable from scratch. So sprite, and the type is sprite, and then need to find turnip, and we need to switch it to sprite 2D. Click apply. We can go to our prefab, and for our value, we can select the turnip crop. So we stored that data in our prefabs, and now we can use the data when we need it. So if we go to item slot in flow graph, so the way we can get that sprite is by getting that variable. So object variable. And if you remember, the custom event argument is actually the object that we clicked on. So we can pass it in right here. And inside here, we can get that variable. So sprite, this is going to return us a sprite. And before we set the image to active, let's change the sprite of our image. So set sprite, pass in the sprite, and we get in the image from the child. After we set the image, we can set that game object to be active, and that should be it. So now I can test it out, exit full screen, First, let's go to our item slot inspector and convert it from embedded to a macro. Click convert. I will name it item slot. Okay, now we have a macro that we're using. And now we can click play and see if that's going to work. So first, let's pick up a carrot. That seems like it's still working. And if we pick up a turnip, there we go. We're displaying the image of a turnip now. That is pretty cool. But I mentioned that it would be smart not to rely on the setup that we have right now. And the part that I mean is how we get this sprite from a game object. So this part might change the further we go. And if you start implementing this approach of getting a sprite everywhere, if you later on decide to change, it will be a nightmare to go through every single place where you used this sprite to change it. So one way to make it easier for modifications later on would be to create a super unit instead of this get variable. So we can just create a super unit, copy in this get variable, go inside the super unit, and inside here, let's go to full screen. The input value that we're looking for is the object. So the type is going to be game object, and we can hide the label. And the output that we're looking from here is a sprite, and the type is sprite. We can hide the label as well. Connect those together. We can create a title for our super unit. Let's call it get item sprite. Okay, and we can go to our item slot right here. And instead of using this get variable, we can use this get item sprite. Make the connections, put it here. And currently it's an embedded super unit. So we can convert from embedded to a macro. That way we can use the super unit in other graphs as well. I think it'd be wise to create a folder, call it item, so that we can store it inside there. Call it get item, save. And now we can test it, make sure that it still works. So there we go, it's still functional. If you ever need to find that super unit anywhere, you can search for it in the search and it will find that super unit. And with a similar approach, we can add more data to our objects when we'll need it. This video is longer than usual. We did cover a lot of information in this video. So hopefully you guys found this useful and you can implement some of this knowledge in your projects as well. Like always, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching and thanks for all the support from you guys. And I will see you in the next video.